Hello everyone, I'm Jinyu. Welcome to Jinyu Talks about the spleen and stomach. Many fans ask me whether gastric ulcers are contagious. I also want to ask you all, do you think gastric ulcers are contagious or not? Do you know? Many people say, "Oh, I really don't know." Let's start with the story. There was an elderly couple who had suffered from gastric ulcers for more than 10 years and never paid much attention to it. They usually just took some stomach medicine. Later, their daughter-in-law gave birth to a healthy, plump grandson. Because the young couple was quite busy with work, the child, over 2 years old, was taken care of by the elderly couple. As we all know, after an only child has a baby, the child is usually spoiled by the elderly. The elderly couple was extremely careful with the child, afraid to drop him while holding him, and even afraid to milk him while holding him in their mouth. They really took care of the child in every possible way. However, despite such meticulous care, the child still got sick. Recently, the child often complained of stomach pain. The elderly couple thought that the child might have roundworms in his stomach, so they didn't pay much attention and gave the child some deworming medicine for a few days. But it didn't have much effect, and they didn't see any worms being expelled. However, the child's stomach pain did not decrease, and they realized that something was wrong. Then they rushed to the hospital for examination. The examination found that the child was positive for Helicobacter pylori. That is to say, he was infected with the pathogenic bacteria. Helicobacter pylori. You all know Helicobacter pylori is really very annoying, right? The elderly couple found out that the child had a slight gastric ulcer. The old man panicked and said, "How could the child have a slight ulcer at such a young age? We take good care of him. We feed him the best food, and we feed him mouth to mouth with every meal. Why did the child get a stomach disease? Everyone knows what's going on. It's self-blame. It is Helicobacter pylori that directly affected the child. Do you all know about Helicobacter pylori? How did it cause problems for the child? Let's talk about Helicobacter pylori. In fact, Helicobacter pylori was discovered in the 1990s. Before that, people did not know about its existence, because everyone knows that the stomach is a strongly acidic environment. Under such conditions, it is difficult for bacteria to survive, so it was always thought that there were no bacteria that could survive in the stomach. In the 1990s, it was discovered that Helicobacter pylori existed in the stomach. At the same time, it was also found that it was the main culprit of gastric diseases. And 80 of gastric ulcer patients were caused by Helicobacter pylori. The most serious thing about Helicobacter pylori is that it is transmitted through our digestive tract. Let me give you the simplest example. For instance, public restrooms or tableware may be contaminated. Chinese living habits led to the existence of Helicobacter pylori, which is very easy, because everyone knows that few people have the meal system now, right? The old couple above has had gastric ulcers for more than 10 years, right? Because they didn't pay attention to mouth-to-mouth feeding when taking care of the child. Helicobacter pylori was transmitted to the child through oral saliva. Helicobacter pylori is not only the cause of gastric ulcers but also the inducing factor of most of our stomach diseases. Now that you've heard this, everyone should understand, right? Is gastric ulcer contagious? In fact, What is contagious is not the gastric ulcer but Helicobacter pylori. This Helicobacter pylori leads to your gastric ulcer, and now everyone should understand, right? Otherwise, many people ask me if gastric ulcers are contagious, so many people don't understand. And after saying this, everyone should be clear, right? Next, I will introduce a self-test method for gastric ulcers and Helicobacter pylori, and you will know whether you have Helicobacter pylori. First, I ask everyone. It has a characteristic that is often hungry. And when hungry, the stomach hurts, and eating something can improve it. So we see that many people with stomach diseases often carry biscuits and snacks. And another point is that the stool is black. If these 2 points appear, you may have a high chance of gastric ulcers. And you should go to the hospital for a checkup. In addition, what are the symptoms of Helicobacter pylori? The obvious characteristic is bad breath, and Helicobacter pylori causes gastric ulcers, and bad breath can also cause people to feel nauseous. Speaking of this, I will say a few more words. Helicobacter pylori not only causes gastric ulcers but also duodenal ulcers. It is divided into 2 parts, very simple. One is that eating something will not hurt, and the other is that eating will increase the pain. So these 2 points. I hope fans and friends can distinguish them and not always think that the pain is a gastric ulcer. So what is the gastric ulcer about? In fact, there is a layer of gastric mucosa on the stomach wall, and the gastric ulcer is the damage to this mucosa, which can be understood. Originally, this layer of mucosa was used to protect our stomach. When this mucosa is damaged, our stomach loses its protection and is naturally damaged, so it is easy to have the so-called gastric ulcers now, as the ulcer occurs when we cannot protect the gastric mucosa on the stomach wall well. And the ulcerated mucosa leads to an increasing ulcer area. It will cause more serious gastric bleeding or gastric perforation. At this time, if you want to solve it well, I tell you, it is actually quite difficult, really quite difficult, but we can't give up. We must have the spirit of self-improvement, and rely on it is to raise. So if you want the ulcer of the stomach wall to be repaired quickly, we should protect it well. How? Try not to eat spicy and heavy-tasting food at ordinary meals, and don't make things worse. Try to eat light food that protects the gastric mucosa, such as porridge and rice porridge, or develop the habit of drinking soup before meals. Drink a little soup to protect the gastric mucosa. In this way, when we have breakfast, I suggest that you eat our chewy breakfast paste or wishing breakfast paste, which has a good effect of nourishing the spleen and stomach. Because it is a paste, when you eat these pastes on an empty stomach, it is equivalent to applying a mucosa on the stomach, which can protect and will not stimulate the gastrointestinal tract, so it is very helpful for gastric ulcers. We just said, what about Helicobacter pylori? I'll tell you why many people can't get rid of it. It always exists, and it's passed on to everyone. It's because Helicobacter pylori is a time bomb hidden in the body, so it must be eliminated. But Helicobacter pylori is really not easy to eliminate. You see, many of us are using a combination of 3 or 4 antibiotics. Many people have a lot of side effects after using it, which are hard to accept. Some people use a combination of 3 and the effect is not ideal. For such people, I suggest that you use some probiotics against Helicobacter pylori, which I often talk to you about. The probiotics against Helicobacter pylori, called Wei Yujun. I have said this to you before. I will not say more. Through the bactericidal effect of inhibiting bacteria, it plays a role in adjusting the intestinal flora and improving our intestinal flora. Have you all thought about solving your Helicobacter pylori by killing it before? But it gets worse and worse, right? So it's better to improve our physique and enhance immunity through the balance of beneficial intestinal bacteria, which has a good effect. So it requires long-term adjustment, and there are no side effects to the body. You need to understand the truth. The repair of gastric ulcers requires a long-term process. You can also directly supplement some protein, such as meat protein or some protein. If you have bloating after eating, I suggest you can also drink some protein powder, which can be simple to drink. It is often said that 3 parts are treated and 7 parts are raised, and the recovery of gastric ulcers is no exception. In the process of using probiotics for health, we must pay attention to what we call food nourishment for the spleen and stomach. Otherwise, we have no way, right? Helicobacter pylori is indeed a very annoying bacterium. To solve the problem from the source, I suggest that the focus should be on maintenance. If there are fans with gastric ulcers, I recommend a method of food nourishment for you to try at that moment. Using peach kernel and pig's belly to cook porridge. Very simple, very simple. You can buy a pig's belly and then choose some peach kernels and remane agglutinato. 10 grams of peach kernels each. First remove the skin and then prepare some of this pig's belly and cut it into shreds with rice. Cook it with high heat and low heat, and be sure to cook it well and cook it rotten. This porridge can be eaten for breakfast. And it can also be eaten together with our food or the 5-element breakfast paste, which will have a good protective effect on our stomach in the long run. So, if there are friends with gastric ulcers, you can personally experience it. After talking about this, everyone must remember that gastric ulcers are not contagious, but the root of contagion is Helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori leads to your gastric ulcers, so when these problems occur, you also need to pay attention to yourself. For example, if you have Helicobacter pylori, try to have separate meals or have less contact with more people when eating. If there is a family, I suggest that everyone should resolve it as soon as possible. Otherwise, if one family member has it, the whole family may have it because they do not have separate meals and are contagious to each other, which can easily cause problems in the stomach. So I hope everyone pays more attention to the issue of Helicobacter pylori. Well, I will talk about this topic with you for now. Thank you all for watching. I hope you subscribe to my channel and see you next time.